Hello, everybody, and a warm welcome to Dr. Glenn Livingston. Today's discussion is a departure from the content I usually post. I only became aware of Glenn about a year ago, and his wisdom and knowledge has made a profound difference in the quality of my life. I will let Glenn introduce himself shortly, but before I do, I want to share with my viewers something personal that I may have alluded to here and there, but I've never really spoken about it openly online before. The reason why it's taken me this long to share about this aspect of my life is because it's taken me almost 40 years to find a solution to this problem. And boy, have I tried over the years with dozens of different healing modalities, as well as being a member of 12-step fellowships for 25 years. As an aside, I was brought up in an Orthodox Jewish home, which is kind of an eating disorder waiting to happen. Um, yeah, oh yeah.
Yiddish mama?
We have Christmas every
Yeah.
Friday night, Saturday, holidays, you name it, bar mitzvahs, weddings. It's just non-stop. Um, oh gosh,
Regala,
oh,
Hallerbread,
it's
Lichum
just
Kugel. Yeah.
yeah.
Can you tell I
Mm.
lived that too? I'm sorry to interrupt
So
you.
when I was 17, after reading an ancient text, my vulnerable human mind came up with what I realize now was a dangerous and unhelpful idea, which triggered what I would describe as an eating disorder, which would last for 40 years until I came across Glenn. Most of my life, up until 17, I was a little chubby, and I realized that my eating was out of control at the time. I interpreted this text to suggest that the way to gain control was to starve myself for a while, and after I'd gone to that extreme, I would then end up in a state of equilibrium. And as you can imagine, it didn't end well, leading to 40 years of disordered thinking and behaving around food, mainly with binge eating. I have a very fast metabolism, so it didn't manifest in obesity, although at my highest weight about 20 years ago, I was 20 kilograms heavier than I am now. But for me, it was more about the obsession of the mind and how the food choices I made me feel. I would often eat myself into a food fog or until I could literally not eat anymore. I would often end up in pain from the overeating, which could last until the latter part of the next day. And despite seemingly wanting it to stop and promising myself that tomorrow would be different, I would repeat the same madness day in, day out. I had therapy, read books, engaged in dozens of different healing modalities, and although many of these experiences helped me in many ways, none of them touched the eating. 25 years ago, I joined Overeaters Anonymous, also known as OA, and until I came across Glenn's work, I was still attending meetings. 2 years ago, I discovered that there was a secular alternative to many 12-step programs and joined secular OA, which, since the COVID debacle, is all online. It was in secular OA, which is less dogmatic than regular OA, that someone mentioned your old program, and here we are today. I loved the honesty and fellowships at the OA meetings and witnessed hundreds of people having miraculous recoveries from some of the most extreme manifestations of eating disorders one can imagine. Just to throw in a funny story, which isn't that funny really, from an OA meeting I attended many years ago, a member shared how he went to his best friend's wedding, saw the wedding cake the day before, ate the whole thing, and spent the wedding day helping the family look for the lost cake. That's how,
Man
yeah,
after my own heart.
that's how serious some of these cases were, and many recovered from hitting the most awful rock bottoms. The problem I had with OA is that my eating issues were not quite as bad as many members, and it often takes desperation to be willing to do anything, including surrendering to a so-called higher power. I never experienced such desperation, and as some of you may know, I'm not very impressed with the creator of this madhouse called Earth, so I struggled with these concepts. Overeaters Anonymous is based on the Alcoholics Anonymous program, and although the creator of AA, a man known as Bill W., was clearly ahead of his time, he created the program 100 years ago, and we therefore have 100 years of modern science and psychology to draw from. And I'm sure if you're around today, you would update the program in light of these modern discoveries. One of the objections I had was the idea of powerlessness, and that by repeating that I am powerless over food or anything else, it seemed like I was creating a self-fulfilling prophecy. And then Glenn's work popped up, and I listened to him reading the audiobook version of his old book and signed up for his course in May of 2023. And I've stopped binging, improved my diet considerably, subsequently increased my exercise and yoga regime. I've stopped and curbed other bad habits like limiting time I play online games or look at social media, etc. I'm also slowly using his system to introduce good habits into my life, from simply drinking more water to creating a daily action plan. I no longer identify as a binge eater. Instead, I identify as a healthy eater. I do an average of an hour's exercise and yoga a day, and I feel the most healthy, well, and content I have ever felt. Having said all that, I learned many things from the 12-step program, including the caution to avoid there being any poster boys or girls for any system. And I'm only 8 months into it, and who knows what the future holds. So I'm making it clear that I am not a poster boy for your system or any other. Enough about me. Let me introduce the delightful Dr. Glenn Livingston, creator of the relaunched and updated Defeat Your Cravings program and author of the new book, Defeat Your Cravings, and various other related books. Welcome, Glenn. I am delighted to have the opportunity to expose the viewers to your ideas. Please introduce yourself and tell us a bit about your history, how you came to this work, and what you have been up to for the past 8 years.
Well, Denny, I'm delighted to be here. I understand that you're not the poster boy, so I won't have them offer you that sponsorship deal
No,
then.
I don't want.
Um, okay. Okay. Humility, huh? Um, so there are a couple of important things to know about me. I'm not just a doctor who decided to work with overeaters. As a matter of fact, I decided not to work with overeaters when I was young because I had a very serious problem myself. I was almost 300 pounds. I don't know exactly because I stopped weighing myself when I got disgusted with myself, somewhere around 257, but I know that I kept gaining weight thereafter. Um, when I was 17, I discovered that because I'm tall and I'm genetically a little bit gifted, I'm modestly muscular without doing much about it, so that if I worked out for a couple hours a day, I could eat anything that I wanted to. Um, 5,000, 10,000 calories of pizza and chocolate and boxes of muffins and multiple lattes and anything that wasn't nailed down. And I always say that if you got to the Woodbury Country Deli in the 90s and you found they were out of pizza and Pop-Tarts, it's because I was there before you. Um, and I would be going to multiple drive-throughs and eating off the floor and eating out of the garbage and, swearing that I would never do it again. And then lo and behold, there I would be again on in the evening, in the middle of the night doing that. So I come from a family of 17 psychologists and psychotherapists. And everybody, I actually, when I was 9 years old, Danny, I would have my friends come over and lie down on my father's couch and tell me about their mother. Being a great psychologist was all that was ever important to me. And I thought that really meant for any problem that you had to get to the deep root of the cause. And so I figured there must be a hole in my heart, and that's why I can't fill the hole in my stomach. So I went on a 20-year journey, um, partially involving Overeaters Anonymous, also involving some of the best psychologists and psychotherapists around, nutritionists, dietitians, psychiatrists. I took medication for a little while, and everything would make me a little thinner at first and then a lot fatter, a little thinner and a lot fatter. The psychology of it was great. I learned so much about myself. I think I became a really soulful person. I think that, I had a spiritual journey of my own, but it didn't work for the food. It did not help me with the food. Simultaneous to all this, I had a dual career. I didn't commute, and my ex-wife traveled for business, and I didn't have kids. So I had a lot of time in my hands, worked at home, and I started a consulting business for mostly Fortune 500 companies in the big food and big pharma space. And I was on the wrong side of the war. I feel very guilty about it, like the Marlboro man at the end of his life who felt contrite about what he'd done. I'm trying to make up for it earlier than he did, and I think I'm doing a good job. But I was selling sugar to adults and kids, and not only sugar, but all these hyper palatable concentrations of starch and sugar and fat and excitotoxins and salt. And none of it really had enough nutrition to make you feel satisfied. So that every time you're looking for the love in a bag or a box or a container, some fat cat is laughing all the way to the bank in a white suit with a mustache, right? That's my very visual image for you. But I did that for a lot of years. Um, and one of the things that I learned from that eventually was that these millions of dollars that were going into engineering these food-like substances, and the millions more that would go into advertising them really effectively and most people think advertising doesn't affect them, but it affects you more when you think that because your sales resistance is down. Um, I said to myself, these are very powerful external forces that have nothing to do with whether my mama dropped me on my head or what, deep internal wound that I have inside of me. This is targeting the reptilian brain, the feast and famine response, those evolutionary buttons that prevented us from starving by pushing our rational thinking out of the way. That's what they're targeting. And that part of the brain doesn't know love. When the reptilian brain looks at something in the environment, it says, do I eat it? Do I mate with it? Or do I kill it? It's a bad college drinking game. Eat, mate, or kill. There's no love there. Love comes from the mammalian brain and the neocortex on top of it that says, before you eat, mate, or kill that thing, what impact will that have on your tribe, on the people that you love, on your community? And then the neocortex says, before you eat, mate, or kill that thing, what impact does that have on your longer term goals like health and fitness, but also music and spirituality and art and contribution and all the things that make us uniquely human. This thing is not really human. This is more reptilian. But we still live with it. It still lives inside of us. And thank God it has the ability to push all of our thinking out of the way when there is an emergency, right? Because otherwise we would be sitting around contemplating our navels instead of running from a hungry bear if a hungry bear was after us. However, in the modern food environment, we are tricked into believing there are emergencies all the time. It seems like an emergency when there is a concentration of calories available for very little effort. And I could go downstairs today to the convenience store and buy 100,000 calories for probably less than $100, right? And across the street, I could buy another 100,000 calories for less than $100, all for the effort of walking across the street, walking downstairs and across the street. My brain perceives that as an emergency opportunity. And it says, well, we're going to need those resources because we're dealing with lions and tigers and bears. Oh my. And we have to hunt and gather and do all the things that our primitive selves had to do. So I said, that has nothing to do with the fact that I am, I have these psychological issues. And eventually I came to the conclusion, but there's more to it if you want more of the story, but eventually I came to the conclusion that I had the wrong paradigm. It was really hard, when you have a hammer, everything looks like a nail. And I was so well versed in depth psychology that everything looked like a nail to me, like it had to be a lie down on the couch and tell me about your mother kind of solution. But it wasn't. And I eventually saw this and I flipped my paradigm to say, I need to be more like the alpha wolf of my own mind. I need to figure out when this thing is getting active, when my reptilian brain is getting active. And then I need to control it the same way that I control my bladder and my testicles, right? If I really had to pee right now, I would say, Danny, I would say to my bladder, I'm sorry, I'm doing this interview with Danny. I'm just not gonna, drop, shower, and pee. I'm gonna wait until later and go to the bathroom. The right time and place in a civilized society, you have to control your biological impulses. If there were a very attractive woman on the street, I wouldn't run after her and kiss her, right? I'd actually run the other way because I'm kind of shy. But there are ways to approach her, and procedures and things that we're expected to do in a civil society. Again, very powerful biological urge, but I'm expected to be in control. Why can't I be in control of my eating? It's a very powerful biological urge. It's pushing my rational self out of the way. Just like, when you really have to pee, it's hard to think straight, but you control it anyway. Why can't I do that? So that started my journey of recovery in earnest. It's not like I didn't get anything from everything else I did, but really, I didn't start to get better until I did that. Here's how I did it. And it's kind of embarrassing for a sophisticated psychologist like me. And if you look at my credentials, I've been all over the place. I decided that I had to know when this thing was awake. And so I decided I'm going to call it my inner pig, and I'm going to make a really clear line in the sand that would function as a tripwire to wake me up when this thing was trying to get active. So I said, well, I have to have a very clear bullseye that I'm shooting at so that I know when I'm about to miss it. So one of my first rules was I will never eat chocolate on a weekday again. I'll only ever have it on a Saturday. And I think I said only after a workout and no more than 2 ounces. But essentially, the essence of it was I'll never have it on a weekday. And that way, if I was in a Starbucks and there's a chocolate bar on the counter, and I hear this little voice in my head that says, "You worked out hard enough today, even though it's a Wednesday, Glenn, and it'll be just as easy to start your silly rule tomorrow. Go ahead, a little's not going to hurt you. You can just start again tomorrow. Yippee, let's do it." I'd say, "That's not me." Whoa, who's in charge here? That's not me. That's my inner pig. And it's squealing for pig slop because chocolate on a Wednesday is pig slop. I don't eat pig slop. I don't let farm animals tell me what to do. And as crude and rude, and you don't have to have a pig inside of you, by the way. This works with other nomenclature. You don't have to call it a pig. You can call it your food monster. But this was just a private thing. I wasn't going to teach it. As rude and crude as it was, it pried apart this space between stimulus and response. And it gave me these extra microseconds to make a different choice if I wanted to. I can't say I immediately always made the best choice. I can say I no longer felt like there was a chronic, progressive, mysterious disease inside of me. It no longer felt like a force that I couldn't understand, against which there was no human defense, as they would tell me in OA. I felt like there was a very powerful force inside of me, but it was still me. I understood it like I understood my bladder. And sometimes I would make a better choice. So I started eating better. Then I started saying, well, now that I'm awake at these moments, what else can I do to make it better? And the way that I personally recovered, I've discovered all kinds of things you can do since then, but the way I personally recovered was to logically disempower what the pig was saying. So I was brought up in a very, Jewish, guilt-ridden family, like you were, Danny. And so I had to have excuses for breaking my own rules, or else I would torture myself. So I'm kind of a neurotic Jewish kid and a neurotic Jewish adult. And guilt would riddle me if I did something against what I promised. So I had to have excuses, and I said, well, if I can disempower those excuses, maybe I'll be able to do this. And I started looking at specifically what the pig was saying. So let's just take a look at, it'll be just as easy to start your diet tomorrow. You just ignore your silly rule. We'll get started again tomorrow. Well, the truth is it won't be just as easy to start tomorrow, because the way the brain works, there's this principle called neuroplasticity, where what fires together wires together. And so if I have a craving for chocolate today, and the thought, let's just start tomorrow, and I reinforce that craving and that thought by eating the chocolate, I will be more likely to have a deeper craving for chocolate tomorrow, a stronger craving for chocolate tomorrow. And I will be more likely to think, let's start tomorrow. And so if you're in a hole, man, you got to stop digging. Always use the present moment to be healthy. That would be an example of disempowering what my inner pig would say. It would say, a little bit won't hurt. And I would say, well, a little bite off of my plan is a tragedy, because it's the difference between who's in charge, you or me. It's the difference between living a purposeful, strategic, planned out life versus just kind of going willy-nilly by my impulses and letting my body take control. And look where that's got me. I'm almost 300 pounds, right? So one bite is a tragedy. So I call this fixing your thinking, or cognitive refutation. And essentially that's how I recovered. I would experiment with different types of rules. I had all kinds of resistance to the word never, all kinds of resistance to the way that the rules were phrased. I had to go through a lot of thinking work to overcome that. I kept a journal for 8 years. And then in 2015, as I was getting divorced, I turned it into a book. Slowly but surely, the book got radically popular, like over 1 million readers. I got a column in Psychology Today, another 1 million readers, radically popular. We formed a company, started hiring coaches to help me handle all the clients. And over the course of the next 8 years, we saw 2,000 people in our group and individual programs. Up until the last year or so, the program focused on how could we fix people's thinking quicker. It was still very thought focused. And I can pause at any point if you want to ask questions about this, but, and I know I had you referred to my old programs. This is what the old program was about. We got really fast at and really good at fixing people's thinking. It turns out there were only really 3 or 4 dozen different things the pig could say across thousands of people. People think there would be thousands of different things, but no, there are only like 48, maybe 50 different squeals that you had to deal with. So we codified those, and we figured out how to teach people that, and we took away their excuses. Um, and the results of that were that when people would engage with us, and the majority of our clients did, um, if they would engage with their coach at least every other day, by the end of a month, we had an 89.4% reduction in their overeating episodes by self-report. Also, about a 47% reduction in food obsession, a significant increase in their happiness scores. It was kind of a miracle. It was a wonderful program. However, I didn't like the long-term results. When I looked at the 6-month and year-long results, it really dropped down to more like 50%, 55%. When I looked at it more closely, it was bimodal. And that means that there was a group of people who kept going and they were continuing to do well, not really around the 90%, more like on the 75 or 80% mark. And then there was a group of people who just dropped out and they were doing as bad as ever. And I said, well, why are people dropping out? What's going on? This is what led to the development of the newest book. And there were a couple of answers. One had to do with the fact that we weren't teaching people the science of cravings and they didn't understand the extinction curve. They thought that cravings are extinguished in a straight line and they're really not. And if you don't know what to expect, then you misinterpret when the cravings hit again and people think it's going to be too hard and they quit. The bigger reason that people were not making it all the way to the 6-month or 1 year mark was because of what I would call organismic distress. Eventually, they would get to a point where it just all seemed like too much for them and they would say, oh, screw it, just do it. I know I don't have any excuses. There's nothing I can say to justify what I'm doing, but oh, what the hell? I'll start again tomorrow, right? And we try to disempower that and we took all this cognitive. And then I started to really dig into that. Well, what's causing this screw it, just do it response? Because if you get such great results with fixing your thinking, why wouldn't people just keep working on fixing their thinking? And that's where we identified organismic distress. The first part of it was people's not attending to their nutrition. And then I thought back and I realized, well, I actually didn't only get better by focusing on thinking. I actually started looking for substitutes. So when I'd have a craving for chocolate, I wouldn't just like grit my teeth and bear it and pretend like there was this Nazi food policeman going, "You will not eat chocolate." I would ask myself, what do I really need? And often it was genuine nutrition. I would experiment with different types of smoothies. I eventually came to a kale juice and banana smoothie or a celery juice and banana smoothie, which seemed to alleviate the craving for chocolate. During the year when I was investigating the screw it, just do it response, I found that people who were eating more regularly and reliably, like 3 times a day, they were less likely to have the screw it, just do it response. If they were trying to intermittent fast right away or do 1 meal a day right away, they were about twice as likely to say screw it, just do it at some point. And so I came up with this saying, flood your body with nutrition at a slight caloric deficit if you want to lose weight. And if you really believe in the benefits of fasting, wait 6 months until you've really beaten your cravings and extinguished a lot of this. And then we'll get you back there. But don't try to do this fasting right away because you wind up creating the perception that you're starving in the brain. And I know that eventually when you intermittent fast, you get fat adapted and your brain is not really hungry, but when the way that it interacts with the cravings, a lot of people can't get through that and get to that point. And we find it's much more effective if you can wait 6 months and beat the craving and the binging first. So that was one form of organismic distress. Another form was being overwhelmed by decision making. Turns out willpower is the ability to make good decisions, and there are only so many we can make every day. And even non-food decisions burn your willpower. So what am I going to do with this email? Who's going to take Jenny to soccer practice? What's for dinner? Which play are we going to see this weekend? What movie do we go to? And who's going to pick up grandma? All of those things wear down your willpower. Even deciding whether to delegate or defer or spam or delete an email is going to wear down your willpower. So we had people introduce some decision-free breaks over the course of the day. For 5 minutes twice a day, can you go hide in the bathroom, put down your phone, get away from the computer, hide from the kids, and just take a little breather. It's better if you can do it outside in fresh air, but a lot of people feel like they can't, and we tend to get a bunch of people that have a lot of kids. So decision-free breaks would do it. All sorts of other things. There was a certain type of breathing that was helpful. Something called parasympathetic breathing. It's the kind of breathing you do in yoga, where you work your way through discomfort by breathing out for longer than you breathe in. It triggers a response in the body that says it's okay to rest and digest and think and strategize, as opposed to something urgent and we have to do it. It takes you from a state of urgent doing to a state of relaxed being. So I tell people to take 7-11 breaths. Breathe in for a count of 7, out for a count of 11. That there was dehydration that can contribute to the sense of organic distress, at least to screw it, just do it. There was isolation. We're a pack animal. And if people don't feel like they have a tribe, that doesn't mean you have to be a social butterfly and doing all these group activities all the time, but you need to feel like you have a tribe around you that's supporting you. And there are all sorts of things like that. And so then combining that with the scientific knowledge of the extinction curve and how cravings are formed and extinguished, I really felt that a thoroughly new book was necessary, because the old book focused on fixing your thinking alone, and the new book understands it as necessary but not sufficient to permanently defeat your cravings. So I really wanted to integrate it with everything else that we've learned and take the benefit of the 2,000 clients that we've had, and update it. So that was a very long introduction, but that's my story, and I'm
Thank you
sticking to
so
it.
much. That's great. I've been creating comedic disruptions in public spaces for many years. And in some of my earlier videos, I would go into a supermarket, for example, and speak out loud about all the poisonous and addictive foods that are packaged so deceptively and how they lead to diabetes, cancer, tooth decay, etc. Until eventually the security would come and haul me out the place. At that time, I was still buying and eating those foods and felt uncomfortable with the cognitive dissonance of talking out loud about its dangers and having YouTube films about it, and yet not being able to stop eating it. In your program, you use this very idea as one of many methods to reprogram the mind to abstain from eating such foods. Can you just briefly touch on that?
Yeah. Well, I got part of my recovery was getting angry that there were all these people
Mm,
profiting from my misery, and recognizing that a lot of the engineered foods were akin to drugs. They were perfectly legal, but it's an artificial concentration of pleasure in a we didn't have pizza and nacho cheese and chips and pasta and everything in the savannah. And so they're pressing these evolutionary buttons and profiting from it while they wear out the cells in my pancreas and destroy my kidneys and make me walk around with an extra 100 pounds in my frame. I didn't think it was fair, and I got angry. Do you remember there was a movie in the
yeah.
70s called Network? And I forgot what he was mad about, this newscaster, but he told people to go to their windows and scream, "I'm mad as
Mm,
hell and I'm not going to take it anymore. I'm mad." And I don't encourage that. But I do believe that it's necessary to turn your shame into anger. We're treated as if cravings are a
mm,
disease, having unusually strong cravings are a disease, when the truth is strong cravings are a sign of a healthy mind doing its job, a healthy brain doing its job in a very sick food environment. 100,000 years ago, if we did not have ultra strong cravings, we wouldn't have done the things that were necessary to survive. But today, in the world that we live in, it doesn't serve us well. And Jakarta Krishnamurti said that it is no measure of health to be profoundly well adapted to be well adapted to a profoundly sick society. And I think that's what's going on. So I think that when you understand that, and you can, in many ways, vilify the modern food industry rather than yourself, it helps alleviate the shame. Because what I've also discovered is that shame is pernicious for overeaters. it makes you feel incapable of resisting the next binge. Um, and it's anti-discipline. It actually prevents you from adopting and developing new disciplines. So I do like people to get mad
And
at
I like
the
the
food
corollary of
industry.
that is
Yeah.
also like I feel now, I just feel like it's in a way as the stuff I do is kind of a form of activism. And in a way, one of those powerful ways of being of taking a stand against these companies is by not indulging and falling for their nonsense. And I feel that can give me a sense of pride or happiness that I'm just not going to support them anymore.
Yeah. And to know that it's
Yeah.
possible to opt out, and to know that if you love your family and your friends, that
Mm.
somebody has to go first, right? Somebody has to show them that they don't have to go along with the crowd and
Yeah.
do what everybody else is doing.
Next question is
Yeah.
this. Many of the viewers will not be able to or may not be able to afford the $1,500 that your program costs. What would you say to them? And are there any free or more affordable resources available to them?
Oh, I've made an extraordinary effort to have extraordinarily helpful and valuable materials in the book and the podcast and the forum. So the book is free on my website for Kindle, Nook, or PDF format, and it's comprehensive. I didn't hold anything back. The entire method is laid out in the book. It's defeatyourcravings.com. Click the big blue button to sign up for the reader bonus list. Um, I have also made an extraordinary effort to record case histories, example coaching sessions, in, experts interviewing me, me interviewing experts. I have my own podcast. You'll also find that at defeatyourcravings.com. And if you click the big blue button, we'll start to email them to you, or you can sign up for the podcast via your favorite podcast subscriber. We have food plan starter templates, and you can sign up for the free forum. And yes, we make. I'm trying to help 1 million people a year to stop overeating, and I know that not everybody can afford to work with us directly. Um, so thank
Okay.
you for
And I
mentioning
also
that.
just want to
Yes, that's
point out
important.
that maybe,
Yeah.
maybe people don't know this, that in order that to do that, to write a book and also to create podcasts of the quality that you have costs you not just time, but plenty of money as well, right? Yeah.
Oh
Yeah.
yeah. Oh yeah. No, I have an
Yeah.
editor and I have to recruit the people and I've got, legal forms for things to sign.
Okay.
Yeah,
Great.
of course I do.
What are your
Thank you.
thoughts about the concept of addiction, and what would you recommend to people who say have a gambling or alcohol problem rather than a food problem?
That is a 50-cent question if I ever heard one. What are my thoughts about the concept of addiction? And then take it to gambling. Remind me
Okay.
about the gambling and alcohol problem. Um, okay. I believe that addiction means love of. If you look it up, what the word actually means, it comes from the
Oh
Latin
wow, I
meaning
didn't know that.
love
Thank you for
of.
that.
It's not associated with disease, it's associated with a love of. And I believe that it's a choice. However, I also believe that the brain's desire to automate the acquisition of calories, nutrition, and other forms of pleasure is so strong that it's possible to reinforce these habit loops and these automation loops to the extent that it feels like you're just not there and you can't help it. So there is a genuine experience of powerlessness. There's a genuine experience of hopelessness and compulsion. But I do not believe that anybody is ever powerless or hopeless or can't help themselves. I think that um, I have an objection to the disease concept. I think that it's the devil made me do it abdication of free will and responsibility. Um, and I also feel like the primary task I have with people is not even necessarily to get them to stop overeating or binge eating, although I'd love to do that. But if I can help them to stop feeling powerless, if I can help them to see that they can adopt even one discipline and gain even one iota of control that they didn't feel like they had before, then I've started a positive snowball in their brain, which should build over time. I believe that the adopting the idea of powerlessness is the cardinal sin in addiction. Um, okay, so I think that overcoming addiction involves an extraordinary effort. which is hard to do alone at first. You can do it alone, but it's hard to do it alone at first. To at first pry apart that space between stimulus and response. And that requires clear definitions of what addictive behavior is and isn't. In the food space, everybody needs to decide for themselves where their lines are. Autonomy is really critical because if I tell you what to eat, eventually you're going to say, "Oh, Dr. Glenn's diet doesn't work. Let's go out and binge until we can find some other silly doctor to follow." And most people have a good idea of what a healthy day of eating is, even though there are all these controversies. It's not really so controversial. I mean, eat some vegetables, get away from the processed food. Whether you want to do that on a low carb or high carb diet or plant based or carnivore diet, I'm less concerned with. I'm more concerned with getting you to either give up or regulate the junk as much as you can. Um, but but have compassion for yourself because these automation loops are very strong, and recognize it's going to require a serious effort to pull it apart. We can talk about why people object to using those tripwires to pull it apart, if you want to talk about that. But then once you do that, you can start to insert a lot of things in the space between stimulus and response. You can work on this as a muscle also, by the way. So every time before you eat, you could just go 1, 2, 3. You could train yourself all day long. Whenever you're going to eat something, just take a breath and go 1, 2, 3. That will teach you to be a little less compulsive, to be a little less vulnerable to that automation loop taking hold. Okay. I think there is a difference between alcohol, drugs, pornography, gambling, and overeating. Um, First of all, you're not going to wake up in a cell with 4 gray walls and your new husband Bubba because you had too many donuts, right? It's not going to happen. Um, Overeaters tend to torture themselves more than other people, whereas drug addicts and alcoholics will get behind the wheel knowing that if they take one drink that they could maim or mutilate someone. So there's kind of a difference of conscience, and there's a different approach that's required for each because of that. So you can't really be as soft on yourself when it comes to drugs and alcohol because you could hurt other people. Um, I mean, you can argue that you're hurting yourself and you're going to leave a widow or a widower behind, or your kids aren't going to have a dad if you keep having too many donuts. And there's truth to that, but it's not as strong as getting behind the wheel like that. Um, and so for people who are interested in overcoming drugs and alcohol, I recommend that they work with Jack Trimpey, who wrote a book called Rational Recovery. And that's where I got the idea of the bifurcated mind. A lot of the rest of the stuff is mine, but that's where I got the idea of the bifurcated mind. He is another name for the reptilian brain. And he's really worked a lot of this stuff out to help alcoholics and drug addicts to overcome it. If you study my stuff to try to overcome alcohol and drugs, if you're truly addicted, it's not going to work because I'm too soft. I believe in aiming at the bullseye with perfection, but then forgiving yourself with dignity. And there's too much emphasis on forgiveness to help people overcome overeating, whereas you can't be that forgiving when it comes to drugs and alcohol. So I'd recommend that they work with Jack Trimpey. Gambling is kind of a mixed bag. It's kind of halfway between overeating and drugs, and but you can develop a clear line and do it like Jack Trimpey says, or you could work with it in the way that I work with it. But I haven't worked with a lot of gambling people, so I don't really have. I try to stay. I try to stay in my lane. I'm really, 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 really good at helping people with overeating and productivity. I can help people to apply this to some disciplines in their life, but I don't feel like I'm an expert enough with gambling and drugs and alcohol, partly because I was never
Okay.
addicted to any of
Now
those.
I'm just keeping my eye on the clock. I know we have a limited amount of time, and I've got quite a few questions still. I have a lot of experience with and affection for the 12-step program, and I have witnessed a lot of recovery, although it's difficult to get an idea of how successful the program actually is. I also value many aspects of the program, including the fellowship, wisdom, and kindness, and would not like to discourage people from trying it out to see if it fits. So without dissing the competition, so to speak, what are the fundamental differences between the 12-step program and Defeat Your Cravings?
Oh,
Okay,
I'll try to be nice. The real fundamental difference is the disease concept and the belief in powerlessness versus confident discipline and assertiveness. I believe we need to cultivate confidence. The 12-step programs believe you need to cultivate humility and fear in a lot of ways. You really have to admit that you're powerlessness and you have to give it all up to a higher power. I don't believe that. I think that recovery, first and foremost, it is uh, is a claiming of responsibility and a willingness to adopt the disciplines. I think that there's a difference in accountability. I see accountability as a temporary solution. I don't think you need to see sponsors the rest of your life. I think it's infantilizing. Um, Whereas I think that for a couple of months to build a cocoon around your new habits, that that it's helpful. So those are the major differences. I will tell you what I do like about the 12-step programs. I like the emphasis on self-reflection. I like the emphasis on community. I like the emphasis on making amends for your sins and people that you've hurt. I like the emphasis on sharing the message in a lot of ways. Um, but I object to the fundamental principle on which it's founded, and so that's why I
great.
don't
Thank you.
tend
That
to
was
agree.
really good. Thank
Okay.
you. Um,
Okay.
so, after just a few days in your program, I realized that I was being offered a system of learning self discipline. To me, building self discipline is priceless and should be taught in schools. I suspect the reason education has not evolved that way is because the system is designed to encourage no self discipline so that we go with every desire it plants within us and consume heaps. But I also think it's the parents' duty to encourage and demonstrate self discipline, and I owe my children an apology for not modeling self discipline. I taught them the opposite by example. Until last year, my words had almost no power at all, especially my word to myself. For example, when it came to my eating, I would promise myself that I would not binge tomorrow, that I would stop eating poor quality processed food or sugar and fat laden cakes, biscuits, crisps, etc. But tomorrow never came, so I didn't even bother trying. I'm not saying that anyone should or shouldn't eat anything, and neither are you. But for me personally, I could never eat one biscuit. It would have to be several or even the whole packet. Now I can simply write a rule down for myself, and I am 100% confident that I will honor that rule. Can you briefly tell us some more about this particular aspect of your work?
Jim Rohn said that a life of discipline is better than a life of regret. And Peter McWilliams said you can have anything you want, but you can't have everything you want. And I put those two together, and that's really the essence of what the program does. It teaches you how to set priorities, your priorities for what you want. So you could have anything you want, but then how do you implement it with discipline? And I think discipline enhances freedom. I don't think it takes away from it. I think that the fact that a jazz pianist has practiced their scales is what makes it possible for them to express their soul. Or the fact that the engineers who built your car had the discipline to make sure that the wheels turned 30 degrees when you turn the steering wheel 30 degrees is what improves your radius of locomotion around the city. Most people are frightened of adopting disciplines thinking it's going to take away their freedom. But when you do it in practice, it actually improves your freedom. So
Great.
I'm trying to be concise. By the way, Danny, if you want me to come back and talk about
Okay,
all
no,
your
no,
other
I've
questions, I'm
nearly
happy
got to
to.
the end now. One of the things I love about you, Glenn, is that you walk the talk big time. I know you're not advocating it for any specific diet, and I love that about the program too. However, I would love to know a bit about what you eat, your exercise regime, and any other good habits you've nurtured and any bad habits you've dropped.
I eat what grows, and I try to avoid everything else for the most part. I eat what grows in an unprocessed form for the most part. Um, I have some exceptions that I'll make at restaurants, especially on a first date. I have some exceptions if I really want to. I have an allergy to grains, but once in a great while, I really want some, so I'll make make a plan to have some brown rice at a restaurant or something like that. But for the most part, you're going to see me eating fruit and vegetables, maybe some beans or tofu, um, spices, nuts and seeds, and that's mostly what I have. It's mostly what I have. I try to make my foods relatively simple. I find that my cravings are a little less if I do that. Except that I've got a couple of things that I rotate in every couple of months just for satisfaction and to keep me craving the good foods. So I have a vegan flourless lasagna that I make with no cheese and arrowroot flour and eggplants and tomato paste and no salt whatsoever. Um, so I have things like that, but I worry about telling people how I eat because this is 20 years for me. This is 20. It's almost 20 years since I've developed this, maybe 18. And I started with one simple rule, and I added things slowly but surely as we went along. And I just found that the cleaner I ate, the cleaner I wanted to eat. The cleaner I ate, the easier it was to eat clean. And when I would make these exceptions, I would just be more upset. I felt like I was losing days of my life when I would make the exceptions. So I make less and less exceptions over the years. Um, Lately, I have a little too many nuts or seeds. I've got to float down another 5 or 6 pounds again, which periodically might happen to me if I get carried away with something. So I'm less than perfect, but yeah, I eat what grows. And I do hot yoga 5, 6 days a week. I do this cardio class in the hot yoga studio a couple of times a week. I walk on the beach. I have an assault bike. I walk with friends around the neighborhood. I'm a very active person. I work at a standing desk. That's where I am right now. I'm at a standing desk. Um, yeah, and you can see a whole bunch of fruit on
Mhm.
my. I'm big into fruit.
Great,
So
thank you. Is there anything else you wanted to say in terms of where people can find your work?
defeatyourcravings.com. Click the big blue button. Sign up for the reader bonuses. You'll get a free copy of the book in electronic format. You will get a copy of the food plan starter templates for any dietary philosophy you might have. And I've recorded a bunch of full length coaching sessions so that you can hear how this works in practice. It's much different than listening to this crazy doctor with a pig inside of him talk on Danny's show. So defeatyourcravings.com. Thanks.